Olo ko bali.
Hey. Oere de kadne koi.
Ha?
Female genital mutilation,
or FGM, is the practice of cutting a girl's genitals, usually the clitoris and often much more, for a variety of reasons: tradition, religion, and to curb a woman's sexual desire. There are about 200 million women and girls today in the world who have been cut. This map shows where FGM is done. The dark red is where it's done to over half the girls. In Mali, where Healthy Tomorrow works in West Africa, about 85% of women have been cut, though the number is going down. In Tanzania, where we'll see the good progress in the film, about 15% of women have been cut. It may not seem as serious, but if you're among that 15%, of course, it's just as bad. Over in East Africa, in Somalia, Sudan, and Ethiopia, they do the most extreme form of cutting. But 29 countries in Africa practice FGM. We used to think of FGM as being mostly an African thing, but now we know it's much more widespread. Indonesia cuts most of its girls, so does Oman. FGM is practiced in India, Israel, Malaysia, Thailand, Iran, the UAE, and elsewhere. All told, there are about 46 countries where FGM is a tradition among local people. FGM is done in 92 countries if we count the places where FGM is practiced by immigrant communities. As you can imagine, the drawbacks are extreme. The excruciating pain of the operation, hemorrhage, some girls die of bleeding, urinary and vaginal infections, sterility, very difficult labor, very painful sex, tetanus, AIDS, PTSD, and death, since many girls, mothers, and babies die from FGM. I went to Mali in 1997 to see what I could do to help in the struggle against FGM. Along with Malian partners, I helped to found Sini Sanuman, Healthy Tomorrow's partner group. Sini Sanuman has convinced 17 villages to stop cutting their girls, collected 75,000 signatures on the Pledge Against Excision, and helped 150 excisers decide to stop practicing FGM. We also do a lot through the media. We put up posters and billboards and put songs, music videos, and other programs on the airwave. We have shown In the Name of Your Daughter twice and played the trailer for it a dozen times on Malian TV because we want to show Malians what is possible once you have a law in place against FGM. This practice is an abuse of the human rights of children. When girls know what FGM is, they don't want it, and they can do a lot to help in this fight against it. We thank Giselle for making this powerful film and letting us use it, both in Mali and here today. Now we'll hear from the president of Sini Sanuman, Shaka Traoré.
Le seul défi qui est la loi contre l'excision. Nous voulons obtenir une loi contre l'excision. Si nous arrivons vraiment à pousser les décideurs politiques à aller dans ce sens, à prendre rapidement une loi interdisant la pratique de l'excision, vraiment nous pouvons dire que nous avons atteint les objectifs. Je profite de l'occasion aussi pour saluer aussi Giselle, qui est l'initiatrice du film Au nom de la fille, que nous avons passé à la télévision au Mali ici, donc pour sensibiliser, et que ce film a été beaucoup admiré. Les gens pensent que le gouvernement du Mali doit prendre exemple à partir de ce film pour sauver et protéger les filles. Merci.
Wangapi nyanyua mikono kama ulitaka kukeketwa ndio familia yako ipate ng'ombe?
Kama hautaenda tutakufa. wakanichukua kwa lazima.
Hapa ni polisi. Kwa nini unanunguda nani? Wewe kuvaa suruali utani. Sasa. Nataka kukeketa.
Na hapa mwisho ni hapo mlipokaa kwenye msingi. Hauruhusiwi kutoka nje ya eneo hilo. Mmesikia wasichana? Ndio.
Bia mama alisema kwa wote wamekeketwa na baba yake alikufa anasema hakekete watoto. Naogopa sababu ningekeketwa ningeanza kupigwa nyumbani.
Wewe unakuwa salama. Umesikia? Umesikia?
Mwalimu kuchukua mtoto wangu toka jana sijamuona. Acha mimi nikaangaike ninavyojua. Mimi na kwamba kufika saa ngapi niambia mwalimu mtoto wako anarudi ndani.
Baba zangu wengine wakiona binti anamwangalia binti yake anaona ni ng'ombe zinatembea. Lakini ni binti. Nitaka nikuonyeshe kidogo huyu binti unamfahamu.
Mama, ukeketaji umeisha, tukekete tena. Sijamkataa, lakini nimekataa ukeketaji.
Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh yes, I know.
Tusikeketwe, tusikeketwe. Tupendwe.
Freedom is coming. Oh yes, oh freedom.
So my first question goes to you, Giselle. Why did you make this film?
Hi, and thank you so much for hosting the screening today. It means a lot to me, and it certainly means a lot to all the girls in the world who are trying to save themselves and who don't want to go through female genital mutilation. I made the film because it's a topic that has been really kind of close to my heart for a long time. And I tried for quite a while to make a documentary about this topic. Couldn't get the funding, fell on deaf ears. But when I found this particular story about girls standing up for their fundamental human rights, I decided I had to do whatever it took to make the film. Because when I looked at what other people had done, I discovered that yes, there had been documentaries about female genital mutilation, but there had not been one single documentary that told you the story of FGM from the perspective of the girls themselves. So I really made the film because I realized nobody had ever heard from the girls. And as I think becomes very evident in the film, is that girls, when they find out about FGM, they don't want to go through it. No girl, you can never persuade me that any girl agrees to FGM once they know what's ahead, once they know what the impact is, once they know how devastated they could be physically, mentally, and emotionally for the rest of their lives. So I believe the voices of the girls need to be heard. And we need to look at this whole issue from a human rights perspective, a children's rights perspective above all else. And in the same way that we stand up for other human rights abuses, we have to make this a huge priority.
I think you certainly achieved that with this film. My second question is for you, Susan. Tanzania has a law, as we've seen, great things can happen when it's enforced. Does Mali have something similar?
No, we've been working on trying to get a law for a long time. We were working closely with the Commission on women's violence against women at the Parliament, and we thought things were going in the right direction, and then they recently had a coup. But it's a long process. The first time we have the Pledge Against Excision, that is people who promise never to excise a girl, and it also asks a question if they think it's time for a law, and virtually everyone who signs says it is time, 95% or so. So aside from just showing how much support there is for the position of not cutting. We've used this to give to the National Assembly. We gave them 30,000 signatures in 2007. And then in 2015, we gave them 68,000 signatures. Now we have 75,000. And we don't know what it's going to take. We've got lots of legislators who think the time is long past, and but they just haven't gotten it together. I don't know. We made a wonderful video. Part of our work a year or two ago was to help legislators go out and talk to their constituents about FGM, the ones who were in this commission against the violence against women. And we filmed those interactions and those speeches, and we put that onto TV a few times recently. And we are still hoping that that's moving things in the right direction, but we haven't got it. We're one of the few countries that in Africa that practices FGM that doesn't have a law. It's kind of embarrassing, but there's a lot of change going on even without the law, but we need the law. It's a big part of what we need.
We're heading in the right direction, at least. So there's hope there. So question for both of you, how has COVID impacted the work of the Safe House and Sini Sanuman?
COVID has had an incredible negative impact on female genital mutilation, not just in Tanzania, but elsewhere as well. The reason has been that schools have closed, that Robi Samwali has not been able to go and do her outreach work. So the community is not getting the message, and that's, as I said, happening in other countries. Because the girls are at home, there's an opportunity to cut them with impunity because nobody's watching. Because people have lost jobs, they are now selling their daughters into marriage in much larger numbers. So when school reopens, or when school reopened, which I think it has now, there are fewer girls that are back in school because they've been cut while schools have been closed and because they've been sold off into marriage. There's a recent article just yesterday or the day before in Kenya among the Maasai talking about exactly the same thing in Kenya. So it's had a very negative effect, and it's put back the fight against FGM quite a way. So that's really, really quite tragic. It means we need to really reinforce our work. And I so congratulate you, Susan, for your commitment to this issue for a quarter of a century now. You are to be so applauded, and it's so important to get that law in place because it is a starting point, right? We need law, we need education, we need prevention, but they all go hand in hand. And the work of grassroots organizations like Robi's and like your organization, Susan, is invaluable in getting the message out.
Thank you. Yes, I second what Giselle is saying. I've read stories from all over about how this pandemic has really hurt the work and has, put more girls at risk. A couple of things that our group has done to address the COVID crisis is that we put out a poster in June that says, don't excise your girls, especially during the pandemic. They have to be strong to resist the virus, and also wash your hands very often. And then we also have made 2 distributions of soap, 100 bottles each. We go around and give to families with a similar message on the label. And then we also made a radio show that we've put on 8 times on 2 different stations, talking about things people can do, and especially not excising their daughters, because people need all the strength they can get to resist this. But one thing, one hopeful note about the law business is I saw a video not too long ago that interviewed excisers and maybe other people, and they were saying, it was from Mali, and they were saying that they'd stopped excising because they were afraid of the law. So there's been enough activism, and the campaign against FGM is strong enough that a lot of people can get the impression there is a law, even though there's not. I certainly won't be the one to tell them.
Okay, so I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat. A question for both of you. What do you think about the changing of culture? So many families seem determined to cut girls because everyone gets cut. Men harbor beliefs about female promiscuity. What methods do you think are effective in changing these cultural beliefs?
Well, one thing I think is very important is to use the famous people in the culture as spokespeople. And so we were very happy when we were making the album Stop Excision in 2000 to get many, many very famous singers to write songs and sing them. And we keep a list of the people who sign the pledge, and sometimes we'll show it to people and they say, wow, this person, and famous legislators, mayors, and so forth. And we have a lot of griots in our movement, the traditional storytellers who usually sing and sing praises to the big people. And a number of our activists are griots, so they have a special place in the society. So that's one way, is just getting famous people to speak up. We have a list of quotations of well-known religious leaders that we have on the back of our main handout. The front tells all the reasons against FGM, and then on the back are all these famous people saying you shouldn't do it. And so that's one way that we've used.
Giselle, what would you say?
Well, I think those sound like amazing initiatives, Susan. I mean, really, really great. I think it's generally understood and believed that the most important thing is to involve the communities themselves, and to get people within the communities who are leading the fight to lead the fight for the entire country. And that's certainly happening in many places, including, of course, in Tanzania. One of the challenges has been that for a long time, the international community focused on the adverse health effects of FGM. And that has led to the medicalization of FGM, so that now in many countries, it is health professionals like midwives and doctors who are doing the cutting. The theory being that if they do it, the girls won't die and the adverse health effects won't be so bad. So what's needed now is to focus more on the human rights issues of the girls, from my point of view, but also of the positive effects of not cutting your daughter. Because one of the side effects of cut women, especially ones that are going through a very severe type, is that they don't want to have intimate relations with their husbands. They're in constant pain. And the husbands go off and find wives or girlfriends who haven't been cut. So that's one of the focuses that Roby also uses in her outreach work. We didn't show it in the film, but in one of the things she does in her outreach work, she does play acting involving two couples and talking about their sexual lives. And the woman who hasn't been cut the woman who is cut, is acting out, not wanting to have sex. And the woman who hasn't been cut giggles and they're all lovey-dovey. So it's one way of showing the men in the community that, oh, wait a second, there's a benefit to having a woman who is whole and who is physically complete, and your life will be so much nicer. So those are some of the other things that need to be done. But I think having that focus of human rights is really quite important. And what they're doing in Tanzania and elsewhere too, and you're probably doing the same, is going to communities and discussing other health issues, and then bringing in FGM as one of the things. So it's not just going in and just talking about FGM, because a lot of communities are not open to that kind of approach.
Yeah, really great thoughts. And Roby is so creative. I love those ideas. What a champion. I have a question from Wyoma for you, Giselle. When do you feel well, I guess maybe it's for the safe house, but when do you feel secure that the girls are really safe once they've been returned home from the safe house? When the cases where the parents have agreed not to cut their girls, but they're still excised, like at what point do you feel comfortable sending them home?
Yeah, well, obviously that's for Roby. I can tell you just, from the point of view of making the film, that there were many harrowing moments for myself as a filmmaker. A couple of times, we were in danger, but I'm not talking about that kind of harrowing. I'm talking about the kind of harrowing of seeing little Rosie going to her mom's and discussing with her mom about whether or not she was planning to cut her, and discussing whether or not Rosie's going to stay there. And it was harrowing for me because I kept thinking, Roby, you can't leave Rosie there. She's not safe. Please don't leave Rosie there. And I was, thinking myself, what if Roby, it leaves Rosie there? What will I do? And as a filmmaker, you're not supposed to do anything. You're there to observe. So you can imagine my relief when Roby decided Rosie was definitely heading back to the safe house. Because it was, I guess, clear to everybody that she wasn't safe. One of the things I learned after I finished making the film, and this has happened to me on many occasions, I learned a vital piece of information once everything's done and dusted. And in this case, it was discovering that Rosie's mom was actually the village cutter. I didn't know that. That didn't come out in the transcripts. Nobody translated anything like that at the time. They discussed it amongst themselves, but forgot to tell me, the filmmaker. And that's a really important piece of information. And because I didn't have any reference to it in anything that we filmed, I couldn't use that fact. But it also speaks to the point that Rosie wasn't going to be safe, because the village cutter is hardly going to exempt her own daughter from that, right? So to finish on that note, as it turned out, Rosie's mom eventually did see the light and protected Rosie from cutting, and became the village champion against FGM, complete with the t-shirt. So that's a really good news story. When does Rosie feel safe? It is when they sign that contract, when she feels that they've taken on board the information, both intellectually and in their hearts. Honestly, though, it's hard to know, because girls can be cut right up to the point of getting married or even afterwards. And Flora, who appears in the film, I have to report, unfortunately, was cut. Oh. She was sent home, and her parents kept her safe for 2 years, and then they kept pressuring her so much that Flora finally, agreed, in quotes, because, as I mentioned at the outset, nobody agrees to have their finger cut off or their toe cut off when they know what's coming. But she felt she had to choose between her family and herself. And that's really the tragedy in this story that I brought to you today, or that you brought today, is that the girls have to choose between their parents and themselves often when they run away. And that's really, really tragic. But most of the girls in the film are safe, but I know for a fact that Flora did end up being cut, but has promised Roby that she would not cut her daughters. And that's where the hope is. The hope is in the future. Those girls you see in the film will all become little warriors for Roby's cause and against FGM. I think they will be the ones that will end FGM in Tanzania in the next generation. And then we need more safe houses. That's a really big message from me about the film too, is we need more safe houses everywhere. And there aren't many safe houses because the international community doesn't feel comfortable supporting them for all kinds of reasons. But without safe houses, if you go into villages and tell them it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, but the villagers can't hear the message, then you still have those girls that don't want to be cut, but will be subjected to it.
Yeah, and that's such a heavy decision for girls that are so young. I can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah.
So kind of going along those same lines, it seems like a lot of girls are sold into marriage right after being cut. Is there a way to prevent child marriage to disincentivize parents from cutting their girls on economic grounds? What are both of your thoughts on that?
It's a tough one.
It's a hard one. I think that there's no way around. I mean, it is to their economic advantage, but we just have to convince people that girls are worthy individuals, and you know, that's a complicated process, but
yeah, you know, the number one problem is that girls are seen as the property of the family, their fathers, right? That's the number one problem. So, and that's going to be a long way in changing that mindset. In the meantime, if we can make girls more valuable if they're uncut, then that incentivizes the community. And that's sort of beginning to happen. You know, Kenya, for example, has a law, and it's being enforced much more vigorously, and they have a really big anti-FGM national campaign. And I think in some communities now, you know, the men are demanding that their wives not be cut. So that suddenly you're going to see a shift. It's a supply and demand situation, right? If the men are encouraged to participate in the anti-FGM campaign and they become advocates, then suddenly more men will not want to have their girls and their women cut. And then it will disincentivize the community for cutting their daughters before they get them married. It's a long process. And the biggest problem is this whole notion of girls and women as the property of men and their families.
Yeah, it's a huge thing to change.
Yeah. It is a huge thing. Yeah.
Okay, a question from Michelle. This might be our last one because we're almost out of time. Is there any follow-up to check in on the girls once they're returned home? And how are the safe houses run and funded?
Well, Robi Samali does check in with the girls on a regular basis. You know, they have limited vehicles, so I can't vouch for the fact that they check on every girl all the time, but they have informers in the villages, so that's one way that they keep checking up on the girls. And how they're funded, they're really funded. It's very much a hand-to-mouth thing, the safe houses, because there isn't one large donor like, you know, UNICEF or an organization like that. So there's a small charity, much like Susan's, in fact, in London, that supports the safe house and raises funding for them. But it's a bit of a hand-to-mouth, you know, situation. But so far they're managing, which is great. And I've raised funding myself for the safe house with the film, you know, donate funds that I get from the film and stuff like that.
That's great. It seems like a great method to make a change, and hopefully there are more being built in other places.
Are there any safe houses in Mali? Sorry to interrupt. Are there any safe houses in Mali, Susan?
Not that I know of. Sini Sanuman has done one case that I heard of where they heard of a girl, they couldn't convince the parents, and they just hid her in their training center where they were training victims of violence against women to do income generating jobs. But that wasn't a you know, sustained effort. It was sort of a one-off thing. One of the reasons that there aren't safe houses, I think, is because these days mostly infants are cut. They think that it's more humane, and by the way, it's much more convenient. You don't have infants running away or making a big fuss, and so it varies around the country, but most girls, especially around Bamako, where we work mostly, are cut very young.
Interesting.
It's a similar situation in Tanzania now too, as you probably surmise, is that girls are being cut younger and younger there as well, and sometimes as infants, and that's, you know, that is really tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary to see how it doesn't seem to be confined to 1 month or one season now either, that they're doing it anytime in the night when it's harder to catch them.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's so important to note that this is not, and I think you probably said that in your opening remarks, this is not an African issue. It's in over 90 countries, including South America, including Russia. And we now think that there are 4.1 million girls at risk every year. That's kind of 1 every 10 seconds being cut. Imagine that. In the length of time that we've talked today, so many girls will have been cut. So it's a global issue. It's a global issue in the sense that it's a challenge that we all need to tackle. And in our country as well, we've got, in Canada where I am, we've got girls at risk, and you have girls at risk in the United States. Yeah. So it's everyone's issue. I'm absolutely certain, I can guarantee that all of you are maybe one or two people removed from someone who was cut. Because it's people of every color, you know, it's happening in Iraq and Iran and in the Kurdistan community. We have many Persians in Canada. So people of every color, women of every color are being cut. It transcends religion and ethnicity, culture, color, the whole thing.
Yeah. Incidentally, Massachusetts just finally passed its law against FGM last month. And the US federal government is working on a law against FGM federally. HR 6100, it's passed the House and it's now in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So anybody who wants to write their senators, that would be a good thing to do. Tell them to pass the Stop FGM Act.
That's fantastic. So fantastic.
Well, it's a great note to end on. Thank you for the global message. We are out of time, but thank you both for being here today, and thank you for your contributions to the cause, of course. For the audience, if you are inspired by our work and would like to make a contribution, please click on the donation link in the chat before you go. We will be giving a portion of today's proceeds to Hope for Girls and Women at the safe house you saw in the film. We also invite you to join our mailing list, which can be accessed through our website. Again, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to our panelists.